Welcome once again to another episode of this podcast channel. And today we're going to touch on quite a difficult topic, and it's the topic of grief. For many people coming into my world, for me to support them as a spiritual teacher, as a coach, as a friend, as a family member, are moving through some stage of grief. So, first of all, if you are here and you're listening, thank you for being here. And if you're going through grief or some of your loved ones is going through grief, my heart is with you, and this video is intended to support you and to help you support those that you love. So let's start with this topic that may be not as fun, but it's going to be deep, insightful, and it is my intention to make it also very helpful. A wise man once said, if you have been born into this earth, then there's one assured thing, and that is that you will pass from this world into another. So, death is a certainty for each and every one of us. And oftentimes, death is the biggest reason for our grief as humans. But grief can be about many things, about a phase of our lives that end, about relationships that end, about a completion of a project. When we graduate, for example, ironically, we may go through a stage of grief, for we are lost about what comes next. Grief is not only related to the loss of a loved one, but it's related to the completion of any cycle. There's different levels of grief. And there's also grief about the hardship of being stuck in a place or time in your life where you can't seem to move on, and where your desire, what you've dreamed of, what you have a deep yearning for, is not coming into your life. And that may also create grief. There are many books about grief and the 5 stages of grief, but I want to take you into a little bit of a further and wider, larger outlook into what grief is like and how can you move through the stages of grief so that you can actually come out the other end. Grief is a feeling, is an emotion, is a sensation that sucks our life's force. And if you are the one living through a moment of grief, you may be feeling that getting up in the morning is very hard. Some people confuse grief with depression, but there are two very different things. If you're going through grief, you may struggle to get out of bed in the morning. You may struggle to move through the day. You may feel as if you are moving through a morass instead of walking as you normally do. And there's this heaviness that accompanies you all the time, and this outlook of having you see everything flat and gray and joyless. And this makes every single day and every step that you take very difficult. And grief often takes away also your ability to look at your life and think that this too shall pass. Sometimes we're so immersed in the grief that we cannot even fathom how this pain will possibly go away. And if you're watching or listening this transmission and you're thinking of a loved one that's going through these steps, then this wisdom, this knowledge will help you support them so that they can more easily move through the emotion that's holding them down. Oftentimes, grief is confused with depression, and that's because many of the ways in which grief manifests are many of the ways in which depression manifests. Whether grief is an emotion that you're going through, and it's not a permanent thing, because by definition emotion is energy in motion. And the reason why people often get stuck in grief is because the pain is so intense that they have a difficulty in allowing the pain to move through, and for that energy to be in motion so that it can move through its phases and go, and you can open into a next stage of your life. This is also a moment where worldwide there is so much happening, and there are so many things bringing hardship for people at all levels in different countries, in different continents, and for everybody and everywhere. And it doesn't matter who you are, what to do, your level of holding power or holding money. Grief doesn't look into that. It's a sure thing. When it's your time, you're going to feel it. So let's explore for a moment this deeply personal way of experiencing the pain of loss. First of all, it's important to understand that the process of moving through grief is not linear. All these books that say there's 5 stages of grief, yeah, they're great. And there are more than 5 stages of grief. And you don't move through them like number one, number two, number three, number four, number five, but rather it's a messy, wobbly thing that comes and goes. It does help to understand the different stages you may go through as you process your grief and as you allow the energy to move through you, because when we can understand what's going on, we are less afraid of leaning into that emotion and allowing it to express itself. Like with every emotion, if we can really open our hearts and dive deep and say, well, show me what this is about. Ask your inner wisdom to connect you with what is this grief about. Many of the people I'm working with are carrying grief. They are aware they're carrying grief and they're not even clear what was the trigger of that grief or where is this grief coming from. And that's another nuance of grief. It's a nuance that may have you experiencing grief as a result of years and years of not listening to what your inner, softer self has been asking of you. And eventually there's a grief and there's a disconnect within you. Let's start with, how does grief gets settled? How does grief get into our lives? Oftentimes is a separation. We didn't see it coming. Our beloved one leaves us with some story which we had no idea that was going on. Other times is the immediate loss of a loved one that passes without any prior illness, so we are not prepared for the loss of this person in our lives, and we are grieving the presence of this person in our lives. Other times is the ending of a cycle like a wonderful project that comes to an end. And one may say, well, how can I even feel this sad? The project was amazing. I had all these amazing experiences, but yes, with the completion of that project, there's an ending and there's something that will not be there anymore. And we may not know what comes next. And then that stage of in between, that liminal stage where we still don't know what's coming, we feel the grief of the loss of that comfort we had in that project. And grief can come out of guilt. We may be mistakenly placing guilt for an event with ourselves and feeling the grief of what we've done, which is embedded in there with some guilt. In her book on grief and grieving, Finding the Meaning of Grief Through the 5 Stages of Loss, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross takes us through these 5 stages. The first stage she mentions is denial. For me, the first stage could be shock or guilt, as I was explaining before. But for sure, denial is one of the beginning stages. And it's a stage where we are dumbfounded about what just happened, particularly when the grief comes from a shock. And we just cannot accept what has happened. And we are literally inside of us denying the fact that this event that is causing us this pain has happened. Sometimes is this very long ongoing event that has been going on in our lives for so long and taking away our ability to live in freedom the way we want to, or to live freely using our time the way we want to, because whatever has been happening has been tying us down to a very unhappy place, situation, location. Then we still have a denial that this can't be happening. That is a disbelief, and struggling to accept reality keeps us stuck in a loop of more pain and more pain. Oftentimes, I've seen the people I work with struggle to expressing this denial and struggle to allowing the pain to show up, allowing the tears to flow. And when the tears want to flow, they close up and they're like, sorry, excuse me. And instead, to allow that pain to be seen, to allow those tears to flow, is such a healing experience. It's as if at the end, the depletion of those tears have actually allowed some energy to move through. We may be exhausted, but we are alleviated of a little bit, at least, of that pain we were carrying around. At one point, the denial becomes anger. We are angry, we're pointing our finger outside. Sometimes we're pointing our finger to God, to Creator. We're frustrated. We have deep resentment for whatever has happened and towards whoever we deem has caused this anger or the situation that has caused the anger. And again, sometimes this is very difficult because people misguide that anger towards themselves. When you want to misguide that anger towards a situation, it becomes absolutely difficult because a situation for the most part is neutral, is a situation. So we have no one to blame and we're stuck in this anger. And anger is a second stage of this pain that we've experienced. So we go angry about everything. Anger permeates every aspect of our lives, permeates our relationships. We start treating in an ugly way the people that we love, the ones that are by our sides, the ones that are sticking to our sides to support us in these moments, and we struggle. However, anger, thankfully, is a higher expression of life force than denial. Denial is keeping you stuck there and you won't move ahead. But when anger is flowing, until at least there is a rage, there is an energy, a life force that is wanting to be expressed. And that helps. Following anger comes bargaining. This is a great stage because you begin to feel, oh, well, I have something to do about this. I have some power in this. And you attempt to make deals and find ways to regain what you're lost, making deals sometimes even with God. And sometimes these deals you want to make with God are angry deals and is, well, if you don't XYZ, meaning change the situation in a certain way, then I won't, whatever it is that you think that would be for the highest and best of everybody. So you're basically saying, I am not going to do something that is good for everybody, even for myself, unless you give me this thing that I desire. And you begin bargaining in these completely oxymoronic ways, but it is a stage that helps us again realize the reality of the situation. We try to find a bargain that it's unfindable because the situation is what it is. It has ended, a cycle has ended, somebody has gone from this plane. It is a stage through which you begin to look at all aspects of the situation to see if there is some way out. Oftentimes, after the bargaining happens, then depression comes because after you see that there is really no shortcuts to the situation, no way to change the situation, there's a wave of deep sadness that comes and leads us into withdrawal and oftentimes into a reflection of the loss. Throughout this depression, I do invite you, particularly if you're the one experiencing grief, to raise your hand and call upon somebody you love, a doctor, even to support you, a friend, a family loved one, and really move with willpower and your mind into asking for help. Do not retreat and do not go and lick your wounds and feel victim and stay alone, because that will just reiterate that cycle of loss and pain and grief. If you are instead helping somebody and you are seeing that they're in this stage of depression, it is very important that you nudge them to move beyond that victimhood state and to really assess if this depression is in need of a doctor or if it's a phase through which the person will move through. And it is very possible that through this stage, you or your loved ones will go through the motions of life, regular life, taking your child to school, cooking food, doing the dishes, like an automaton, like a robot. You're going to be in this flat affect aspect where there is just no emotion, apparently. Instead, the emotion is this hopelessness that is inside. Hopefully, as you allow this to move through, as you give it time, sometimes all that's needed is just time for the energy to slowly, slowly move through you. Then you come to a place of acceptance. And oftentimes, this acceptance happens just one split second. You wake up and suddenly you're not feeling gloomy, you're not feeling blue, you're feeling differently. And you come to terms with the loss and you find a way to move forward. And most important, you understand that, for example, with the loss of somebody, that person will always be a part of your life, will always be a part of who you are. And even if they're not going to be in your life any longer, you will carry that love, that friendship, and that experience that makes you who you are inside of you. When what's ending is a relationship that was very unhappy, this is a conundrum about grief. You may be happy and finally ready to let go of this partnership in business, or this partnership, especially of a loved one, where life was being so unhappy. But what the grief is about is not about letting go of the loved one. The grief is about letting go of the dream of what could have been. And this often is a quirky kind of grief because you're grieving what has not been. You're grieving what will not be. And so you're grieving something that is actually an intangible. You're not grieving the actual project that ended or the person, but your idea of how you wanted it to be that didn't happen. The expectation of how things didn't happen. For this, acceptance is key. To accept the facts. This is how it is. And once you accept the facts, you most often move into a stage where you actually find meaning in the loss. It may take months, it may take years for you to find meaning in the loss. Even in the grief of situations that were literally devastating for you, you may look back and say, wow, if this thing wouldn't have happened, I wouldn't have met this person, lived this experience, gone here or there, and I wouldn't be who I am today in this beautiful space of my life. Understanding these phases of grief is important first for yourself to self-evaluate and know that what's happening to you is completely normal. A lot of people that come to me and are having grief struggle to give themselves permission to actually feel what they're feeling. They judge their own grief as inappropriate. And here I want to remind you that whatever emotion you are going through is absolutely yours to experience, yours to allow, yours to open up for the experience and the emotion to move through you. And as the emotion moves through you, you eventually will come to the other end of it and you will feel the freedom of having gone through the phases. The more we resist the allowing of this grief to move through us, first, the longer the situation lasts, the longer the grief lasts, the longer the depression, the anger, whatever stages you are last. And also, the harder it is to live life on a daily basis because you feel stuck. And in order to not feel stuck, it's important that you allow the energy to move, cry, yell, do whatever you need to do. And you will see that even going through these stages, there is movement. And most importantly, these stages, like I said, are not linear. You may be going from anger to depression to denial once again, to acceptance for a split second, and then to depression or to bargaining. And you may move through all the stages, but eventually it lands. It lands with an acceptance of the fact of whatever it is that happened, and you can let go of the ideas of how you want them to be. Take stock of what is, begin looking in front of you to what is left and what is ahead of you, and begin thinking of what is my best first next step. And this is the final piece of advice. And the piece of advice is, at this moment, do not try and plan for a long haul. Take one first step in the right direction, knowing that you will be stronger every day and you will be able to take another step. Conversely, while you're going through all these stages, do not try to look into the future and figure out how you're going to make it. Because from where you are as you go through the stages of grief, you cannot have an outlook into the future. You must truly allow yourself to be present fully for yourself with what is this emotion within you. And oftentimes that is hard to do. As humans, we're not taught in society how to stay with the emotion and how to lean into the emotion. We tend to resist it, we tend to push it away. But the more we push it away, the more it persists and the more we get stuck. So, for you going through this, I hope that this insight has been useful, that you can identify in what part of the stages of grief you are, and for you helping somebody that you can help them understand and support them, for them to allow the emotions to move through. And a final word about all of us in this world where we're living. We may feel grief and compassion for those around us, for those that are suffering more than us. And it's okay. It's what makes us human, and it's what moves the wave of love to expand for all of humanity. So I hope you allow yourself the humanness to love and open your heart to feel all the feels and allow those emotions to move through you, like the word says, energy in motion, and you will see that you will find a new lease on life. Thank you for watching and listening until the end. Please subscribe to my channel. And if you want, there are free tools in my website that you can download that can support you through these stages. Tools like meditations and tools about creating a morning ritual so that you can begin taking those first steps. I will put the links in the description to this video, and my website is www.theawakenpath.com. Much love to you, and thank you.